Welcome to this session on what is the internet. So we will have this inspiring talk with Bob Frankston, who is a renowned internet pioneer. Actually, the reason why we have local area networks in our home is because Bob created it. So thanks, Bob. And so we will have some inspiring, provocative thoughts on how to develop the internet, how to foster internet connectivity, how to foster ambient connectivity, sustainable connectivity. It's up to you to define it as you want, Bob. So please, Bob, thanks for being here, and go ahead with your talk.
Okay. Now, I'm coming here as a foreigner. It's not that I'm from the United States. I'm from the internet. And I've been living there or online since 1966. So this has given me a very different perspective, in which, if I do that, I don't know, I need somebody to signal next slide. This is a wireless link between me and the controller. You know, the term computer used to refer to people. Okay, so it's okay to get a little ahead, you can guess. But my basic point is we shouldn't think of the internet in terms of telecommunications, which was the implicit assumption this morning, but rather as infrastructure. In fact, it would be best if we talked about, without using the term, the internet. But, you know, we're used to infrastructure like water, railroads, basic, keep going. I'll try to keep up with this. Electricity. Okay, but the internet itself, it plays a dual role, which is confusing. For one thing, it is infrastructure. It's what we use to accomplish things. But the other thing is that the term internet is short for internetworking. It was a technique for interconnecting networks. So it's a way we use infrastructure. So it's in both roles, and that's confusing. We confuse the two. And the important thing to understand, which I skipped over briefly, is that there's an interplay between economics and technology. And the challenge is you have people expert in one or the other, and it's the interplay that's important. So good examples of infrastructure that's free to use are roads and sidewalks. And I often use them as my example. By being free to use, you don't have to worry. You want to take a stroll, you don't have to worry about whether the owner of the sidewalk makes money or sets rules. You just take a walk. And it's that freedom to innovate we'll get to, that's really the key part of the internet. And of course, the wires don't have to be that messy. But you know, basically, if we use software and connectivity, we basically get a chance to repurpose what infrastructure there is. The road might be there for a purpose, but when you drive, you decide what the value of the road is. Now, the problem is that this is running into an old model, which is that this is all about pipes and somebody controlling it. And this is not free to use. You slam into a wall when you try to connect. Now, people can get by this with enough effort, and it took a lot of effort, but your devices can't. So my medical monitor won't be able to. It doesn't have a law degree. It can't read this. Actually, how many of you have read this? Even if I were a lawyer, it's the wrong language for me. So, but the part of the problem is, is metaphors. I kept hearing words like access. What are you accessing and where is it? That's a high speed, because obviously faster is better. You know, an airplane that goes 1,000 miles an hour must be better than one that goes to your destination. The idea that, you know, color matters, the spectrum allocation, and how do you consume data? Do you eat it for lunch? What happens to it after you consume it? So our very language makes it difficult to talk. So I want to frame this in terms I call generative opportunity. Look at use the term generative networks. And how do you create the ability not to create value, but to also create things which create more value? And that's really what generativity is about. So the question is not how to get people to connect to the internet, because I'm confused about why we want people to connect to the internet. What we want to do is create opportunity for them to discover new possibilities. So it's really about empowering people, not just giving them a solution, or if a biblical reference is you want to teach them how to fish. You don't want to just supply fish. And this is what we did with spreadsheets. The idea that there's an app for this misses the point. That means, what, there's an app for this, I can't do it? No. You want to give everybody the ability to create their own solutions, not just choose which app to use. And that's really what the internet is. Instead of a specialized services and everything, and you mentioned Minitel earlier, that was a lot of these apps and services. And the internet really opened that up. Now, it doesn't mean Minitel wasn't valuable. These are valuable, but you get generativity when you give people the tools. I need some hand signal. So, and the other thing, confusion is people keep talking about the internet and the web. I guess that's where the access metaphor comes from. You're accessing a website somewhere. That's just, it's a cute app. There's no question it was a really neat app. But it's just one more app like email, voice. And, I'll get into it. There's more technical as I get into it more. I want to remove the mystery. Anybody can create these apps. So it's useful to step back to sort of how did we stumble across the internet? So there's a standard history that we laid out the wires and the ARPANET, we survived in nucleus. Basically, it's all nonsense. It's not that there's nothing truth. It's true, but it's not about the internet. The real history of the internet is that it's as Demi mentioned, it's a discontinuity from the past. It's not just a disruptive change, it's a completely new reboot because it comes from what we're able to do with software to program around what's ever in the middle. The current protocols of things were first approximation of how we got it to work and how we figured out how to extend the connectivity locally to the world. But what really happened is we're interconnecting networks. But I focus on one particular history because it's most illustrative. So let's compare telecommunications with the internet. Now, you can't really compare them one for one, but you can compare them by understanding what telecommunications is for contrast. So we need to keep moving. Okay, so basically the telegraph is our model for telecommunications. We carried messages like freight. You put it on, carried each one. And when I gave this in China, in India, I discovered in Hindi, hello world translates as hello world. But if you go, okay, one thing I dropped out is that the network has to know what language you're speaking in the old days in telecom. You create a different service for video, you get different service. It's not just Minitel, but this is the way telecommunication works. You need a different wire for video because in analog you have different losses for each kind of signal. This is it. So this is how you preserve meaning. Morse code, you have to know what language it is. Now, you can use Romance alphabet, but if you can send Portuguese, you better have Portuguese operators, or Portuguese-speaking operators, because they won't be able to correct the errors. They won't hear it. So there's all this knowledge inside the network. So what the problem we had with analog telephony was it didn't work over distance. Telegraphs worked across the country, but they were digital. Telephony didn't. So I actually go through this fairly fast. So what we learned to do was digitize by sampling voice, so we turned to digital signal. So that really gave us digital. But the problem is, as with any new technology, we fit into the old model. That's why we talk about it in the same way we talked about telegraph lines and the business of telegraph, which is freight. And we use words which confuse us. What does it mean to communicate? Telecommunications has this very idea that communication is what happens in the wire. So as I often point out, the School of Communications is not in the EE department. It's something completely different. And this is, again, we use the technical terms like work and physics. We don't confuse that with the everyday use for labor. But in telecommunications, we confuse the terms and then have policies based on that confusion. So how do we program around this? So we learned to interconnect computers in software. When we first got computers, we started interconnecting them. And one example I use, and the reason I like it is because it illustrates the idea and because I happened to be in class studying this along with Bob Metcalf when he was doing his little project, which he called the Ethernet. So the radio packet network, if you have a traditional wire between computers, you go through telecommunication infrastructure, you hope they keep it all working. But when you have a radio packet network, there's nobody in the middle to make it work. So we had to learn how to solve problems in software. There's no provider. You can retry, you can have other policies. And this is how we learned the techniques for programming around. And Louis Pouzon used some of these ideas to get Cyclades working. a reason that Ethernet is special in history, it's not that it was the only network, but it really took the radio packet network idea, and there was no provider. We just had a coaxial cable that acted like a network, and this is the confusion. Unfortunately, we called it a network in the same way you call a social network a network. But these days, you don't have somebody setting, we used to have people setting up social networks, but that's less common today. So we understand the difference between a social network that we do ourselves and sort of matchmaking. But in telecommunications, we use the word networking to mean a service somebody else does. So when we call the Ethernet a network, we're confusing the two ideas, something we do ourselves, but we're actually doing networking. And Wi-Fi adds to confusion because it puts a perimeter around. There are a lot of stories that get confused, like the bulletin board system. So there's a lot of confusion. So the big idea that the defining constraint for internet networking comes from this packet radio. We have to solve problems outside the network. And that has an economic consequence. The value is no longer inside the network. And that's a key point, because this morning people talking about sustainable funding, CapEx and everything, they expect it to invest and make the money back. Well, if you invest in a private company and it's not getting the value, that can't work. That's why it has to be society or community funding. So let me, that's fine. TCP was a corporate protocol for the geeks, we could talk about that. But actually, the important thing about TCP is there's nobody in charge. We actually cooperate at the edge. This goes against, if you ever heard of the tragedy of the commons, this is the antithesis. So let's understand how the technical difference now between telecommunications and what it means to depend on a provider and how we do things in software. So this is telecommunications with fax, TV. We scan the image and pass it across the network. So we scan it carefully. Then every packet has to go precisely in order across the network to be assembled at the other end. You lose a packet, you miss the image, it doesn't work. And for telephony, the precise timing and everything. So that's a very simple model, entirely dependent upon the provider in the middle. They create value by making sure everything works. Now, with software, we take a different approach. Okay, we can tag the image, we can number the image, because it's software, the packets, we can do what we want. And then we don't have to depend on the operator because it doesn't matter what order it gets in. We'll assemble at the end, something's missing, we figure it out later. We can even, don't even have to get every pixel. We have a lot more flexibility, but it doesn't matter what's in the middle, whether it's wired, wireless, we do it ourselves. And that's the big difference. It means, we're not only are we not dependent upon the operator, we can take individual segments, hook them together. If things work, we have to discover what works and be as creative as we want. So the big surprise is that put me through these. Voice over IP works. We can do voice over the net because there was a myth that, well, okay, you can do pictures and stuff like that, but the fact that we can do voice really confused people, was not supposed to happen. I mean, in the internet, people understood at the beginning you could do voice. But what's amazing is how smoothly it works. And it works even though we can't buy special treatment. The network does not know its voice. It can't know its voice. So how does this work? Why did voice start working? My signal. Okay. The reason it started working is that the web happened. And this is part of what's confusing. You don't pay for voice. You pay for generic capacity, and it happens to we discovered we can do voice. There were no promises. None of these services are promised. What makes it confusing is that, yes, it looks like cable TV. We can watch TV over it. But none of those were built in. So the policy people who are used to doing things for a purpose and solving problems are completely befuddled by this and cause harm. Because they think that they're heroes putting policies in to make this happen. When we did at the edge despite them, it's not even despite them independent, but when you have things like traffic shaping, you build voice and you break other things. When you decide that voice is more important than packets, the medical message doesn't get through. You can't know if this is my medical monitor that this product is calling for help if I'm having a heart attack, because I don't know. This device is just sending a message. It's not until it gets to the other end that you know it's important. So there's a very different dynamic going on here. But it's also an economic dynamic with the value out. Look, Wi-Fi, cellular moving over Wi-Fi. Well, why, the cellular companies said, why do we need the cellular companies? What are we paying them for? We're paying them for, please stop preventing us from communicating as much as you did. That goes back to the first screen. So I learned by doing. So this is a Raspberry Pi project in my house. If you want to connect to it, I didn't put the URL up, but you can go to http://blinky.frankston.com:8001. When it's running, you can go to the screen that's on here. You'll see, actually, I've improved the screen since. Nice messages on there. And you can control the lights. And this works completely inside my house. That's a completely local link. Or it'll work from the rest of the world. And that's sort of the magic to understand why the internet is generative. So we go to the next one. So the key thing, now here's where I stop talking about networking and talk about architecture and software, which is really what this is about. The networking is just a little engineering thing on the side. Sure, we took the entire telecommunications network, you'll see, and we turned it into a single wire, with no more value than a piece of copper. But what you need to understand that this is about enabling people to create solutions simply. So all it takes to connect two Raspberry Pis, in this case, is a single connection. Now, HTTP there is because I can do it with a web page, but I can use the same protocols, RESTful APIs for those who understand it. And that's all I have to do. I want one device to speak to the other device. That's it. That's all I need to know. That means I want to do crop management and everything. I don't have to carefully wire things. And right now, we have to worry about making the connection between this mic and that. I should just be able to take that machine, use it anywhere, and just say, I want to connect to that projector. And we're getting there. But right now, we have a mixture of legacy. We have a special connection for each type of device. I mean, why am I carrying this when this is a perfect good wireless mic? Just like it's a perfect good controller. This is the issue about creating solutions in software. But the important part is we want to empower people by making it simple. When I do this, I don't have to negotiate with anybody between. I just do it. And the thing is, this relationship is persistent, independent of whatever's in the middle. Now, sometimes I might not be able to get it. I might run into that green screen or whatever. It can't work. But you don't fix it by making special deals for each case. You fix it by having an architecture which fixes problems independent. So in reality, if you call 8001 and connect from outside, you connect from inside, it'll work. If you connect from outside, I have a shim there. I put in a port forwarder and all these shims in there, but they don't affect the relationship. That's what's important. You keep it simple and persistent relationships. And as I said before, we could take the entire, by the way, we could take the entire telecommunications industry and reduce it to a single wire. The fact that this works across the world means the telecommunications industry is nothing more to me than one wire. Has no more value than a piece of copper or glass. Now, this is the secret to Moore's Law, which is a whole other discussion of economics, that by separating these two, we can rapidly improve the technology. I can choose whatever technology works. I can choose glass. I can choose, copper. I can make copper run at 20 gigabits in the house. That's the speed copper now runs inside the house. It's 20 gigabits. We just call it USB because people don't understand bits of bits, but that's just a temporary anomaly. And so you can get those kind of improvements because you're no longer locking it down to a particular purpose. So there's the telecommunications industry, just a little blip on the side, so continue. One little gotcha, no promises. Just like the voice, we couldn't promise voice worked. We just discovered one day that there was enough capacity lying around. I remember somebody coming back from Switzerland, one of the places, a lot of capacity, discovered VoIP worked. And Vonage came on in 2003, it just worked. No, and everybody will tell you stories about all the protocols, MPLS, QoS, all the, it's crap. I spoke to Tom Efson, who supplied the thing, no QoS. None of that was in the network. It's stories we tell children because they can't believe it works, so we make up stories. Like the stork brought you the internet. So the traditional telecommunications is you have a wire for each service. That's the model, the Minitel model and everything. And we virtualize the wires to create the zero rating is a virtualized wire, but it's still, the model is a wire for each service and connecting to the other end. And then the cable TV companies in the U.S., they're community antenna companies, put in these big coaxial cables. They call it broadband because that's what the radio signals are called, broadband. But of course, it sounds like wide, so people just assume there's a fat pipe. And this is, again, a language problem again. So they discovered this value, and you notice I put the Brazilian version in. And the same for the PC. So the idea of 1995, this is what Luke was referring to, is every time you got a PC, you get a separate account. You want an IP printer, another account. I have a separate account for this watch. This is an old model. So I was at home and just decided I'm going to connect my PCs. They're already connected. And I figured you only need one connection for all the PCs. So, that really took the power away from the phone company. So the next stage then is to realize if I've got a network at home, let's think about this differently. I'm not taking that broadband connection, sharing it. What I'm doing is I've got a local cloud network. Think of it as a cloud. I hate to use the term cloud. So if it's in my house, it's okay. And I put a NAT router at the edge. And then that means that anything inside the house is free to use. I didn't have to justify, you can go to 10 gigabits, whatever. And the problem was I wanted to connect to the rest of the world. I didn't want to connect to the internet because that device I showed you is the internet. What I wanted to do was interconnect with the rest of the world. How do I do that? And that's the problem we're trying to solve with telecom. But instead of broadband services, I use that broadband pipe for my purposes. I just tunnel through it, and I keep the power because I can choose whatever pipe. And this is the only difference. If I throw this switch in my house, you see no difference whatsoever. The TV service might lose the programming guide, but the internet connection continues to work. My dynamic DNS switches over. And that means you have the power at the edge. The communities can bargain very strongly because they don't depend on telecom. They can go radios, whatever. You can go O3 satellite sometimes. And if you're willing to discover what works instead of relying on promises, you have a slow connection? Fine. Cache locally. Speaking to Nicholas about delivering data on disk. You can be as creative as you want. And that's how Skype works. Skype worked before technically you're supposed to, because they were creative. The people with the SIP protocol, telecom people and standards, they never really got it to work well. So let's call it innovating rather than cheating. But if you innovate, you can work past this. So the way forward with community networks is you take a look at each of those clouds and you connect them together. I should go behind, keep it, keeps going back. Okay, so basically you can just grow those local clouds. Instead of connecting the rest of the world, you just interconnect locally and you build a larger community that interconnects with the world. So it's the same model, it's just at a larger scale. At a larger scale, you get more bargaining power. As you grow the scale, eventually, you still keep the free to use. And the term ambient connectivity means you don't have a border, you don't have to negotiate, it's just there. By the way, I added the privacy because I spoke at RightsCon. You also have more privacy because you're not dependent upon the provider. So if you have a local community, that becomes the world. That grows to become the world that's just interconnected. And the thing we can use, instead of broadband pipes, as I said, we can use any available facilities. Because all we're doing is exchanging packets. So that's why the community dynamic works so well. These communities interconnect. And the other thing is, if you keep those relationships independent of the physical path, you then have freedom. So if I'm on one wiring system, which you might call a network, I prefer to use facilities to avoid the semantics, and you have another one there, the devices could figure out a path between the two. They're adjacent. The application will continue to work. So you can drive down the street, and instead of a cellular network having to track you, you just maintain the relationship yourself. This is why when you take your computer with a web page, you can take it to one site, close it, open it up another, and continue your browsing. Because that state is not inside the network. The state is maintained in your browser, and maybe the site you're going to maintains a relationship. That's why it's called RESTful, which means it's I've got examples. So basically, it's stateless. That's what the S means, stateless connection. So one thing you should skip over local expertise. You do want to develop local expertise, and that's the important thing. In other words, if you can take control, and this is what Nicholas doing, you need local expertise. So, let's see, can I skip over? Well, let's go back one just so I can remember what I was going to say. Okay. Yeah, okay, we can move on. I said that. Okay, so then the challenge is how to connect to the world. Now, instead of waiting for somebody to run new fibers, first we have value locally. That's important. So it's not about convincing people they've got to go to the web. There are other ways to use connectivity than the web. But the key, what is important is that they have a community that's shared owners. And we'll get to what it means to be. So here's what it means to be an owner. Should we put this? So, Lions, the truth is that the economics of the Lions, tracking lines failed, but Lions are equipped with GSM, GPS tracking collars. This is real. You see them in a lot of nature things. Spoke to the guy who did it. And I can get to the reference in Ground Labs if you want. But the thing is, in order to do GSM, they might not go to the Sprint office and get an account or whatever the local telecom is. But in fact, they have to have an account. They've got to be registered. And you don't argue with Lions. You don't give them bills. And so, basically, now the internet approach is we own the radios. We own the community network. It doesn't matter. Again, I'm not worried about exactly what protocols. What's important is economics, that you own the radios, own the facilities. That means you can track cows. Or with other devices, because cows, you're not going to spend, farmers can't afford an account per cow. But if they own the radios, you can get some Raspberry Zeros with some chips. You can be creative as you want. And it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other thing. So a cow wanders out of range for a little while, as long as it comes back eventually. So it's this kind of creative use, and these are the examples I want. Again, this is a good one. Go to the next one. The type of innovation, because we also have another byproduct, is all these cell phones. I use them as wall switches in my house. They're becoming cheap. I can buy, the latest price I paid for a brand new Windows phone is $40. And if you do, and I write my apps in the browser. I use JavaScript, TypeScript, and that part of it, in a longer talk, I'd show that Raspberry Pi, how simple it was to do. It takes one line to do a web server. That's all it takes. There's no mystery here. So this is the kind of thing you can do by repurposing the technology. Now, unfortunately, how many of you know what ARPU is? Okay, ARPU is the god that telecommunications companies pray to. It's average return per user. They're trying to maximize how much money can they take out of your pocket. And these devices are designed to extract money to the carriers. But over time, and this is why I use Raspberry Pi as an example, we'll have devices that are really better for this. But still, with software, we can repurpose it despite the intent. So, signaling the next. So, as I said, so there are lots of ways to use connectivity. The medical, medical monitoring in a lot of countries alone create value. Now, the problem with the medical monitor, when you hit that green screen, your medical monitor cannot get through, as I said. So this is why we need, again, to use some ambient connectivity. And I'm looking for other examples. Monitoring crops and fields, farmers knowing where the rain is. And all these things become simple because you can do it now, but it's expensive. You've got to have carefully maintained. You've got to place things in the right place. One example we talked to is about docks, where you just place things. You don't worry. You can use GPS to figure out where it is. You can configure it dynamically. You're no longer carefully building things. And I find those more exciting than the web because they work locally, they're really empowering, and they basically show you really power. One important, and the other part is APIs. How many of you know what an API is? How many of you are programmers? No new program? You program, you can't pretend you don't. Okay, API is a program interface. It makes services available. Can you imagine if you could use GPS till you paid? Luckily, GPS was accidentally made available to everybody. Think of the economic value created by GPS as just one minor technology. Now, it turns out that the civilian GPS wasn't reliable, but we programmed around that. And the military gave up because they realized we could program around that. And again, that's the theme. We get generative opportunity by not just having the physical facilities, but having the software interface available, having the knowledge, by empowering the community. And then, you know, of course, you get direct connection to markets and everything. So the goal should be to create an infrastructure that facilitates connectivity and empowers people. And when I'm careful, I don't talk about networks. I talk about facilities we use to enable connectivity. And by starting locally, as in the cloud model, you then have a balance. It's not, you're not expecting telecom to come to you. You bargain with them, you know, and as your community grows, you know, and as we discover ways to get abundant capacity, like, I don't know if you know what caching is in computers. So if you want to watch, say, Netflix movie, how many bits does it take? It might take, say, 1 trillion bits for a fully high-definition movie for, you know, a few hours. Let's say you want to watch it again. Second time, it takes 0 bits. You can cache ahead. So you know, how would you price this? When, you know, I wake up this morning. Well, how much capacity do you need? We need 1 trillion bits or 0. I don't know. We'll discover it when we try it. Or with Netflix, you compress to 2 megabits. DSL, people are jealous, but DSL was designed to assume they compress like 4 or 5 megabits. Turns out technology's gone beyond that. So this is why we need a different model for paying for infrastructure, by having communities own the facilities. We have a way of getting there by having communities own the local facilities and bargaining for passage through telecom, but knowing that they have the power. They're creating the value. They're not beholden. If they insist they must have 100 megabit video, they're going to pay a high price. If they can make the video work at 2 megabits, they pay a low price, and as the model changes, they're going to get more capacity. Because one thing about markets, I don't know if you study economics, you've heard about demand versus supply. Well, if the demand goes up, the supply increases. It's only in strange cases where it does. I mean, if somebody's buying something, you give them more of it. You know, during a holiday season, you know, Christmas, people buy, the prices go down because people buy more. So that's a dynamic. So if you don't require something, you can bargain. And this is the secret of the internet. We didn't bargain for voice. We waited till voice became cheap as a byproduct of the web. And that's the dynamic, I think, that's important for broadband. So instead of having a policy, we're going to do it 2030, no, let's do what we have now. We can use copper. Copper works fine. You can run copper at many megabits. But what's secret of Moore's law is it's driven by markets, not technology. And again, don't worry about, I mean, why do we have separate wireless internet? Here's another dirty secret. The mobile internet, we'll take this one out. There's no mobile internet. There's a small screen internet, and there's a big screen. And that's just the way the apps work. It doesn't matter. You know, somebody said Wi-Fi, if we're going with wireless. Who cares? We've factored that out. That's invisible. That means we're not held hostage. So, now, Connectivity XYZ is still a reserved name. I think I'm going to point to the EC3 site as soon as it's available, because instead of a freemium model for telecoms, we want an apparent community model. Now, people will choose, as with Red Hat, sometimes to pay for help, but they're paying for help with their facilities. They're not paying somebody merely because they have the ability to prevent you from communicating. So, questions? Anybody awake?
First, an applause for Bob, thanking him for this.
Actually, that didn't go too long.
Yeah, actually it was a
Did
good...
I talk too fast?
Yeah, no, it was perfect. Actually, it was perfect and inspiring as usual. I mean, I think it's very interesting to have your perspective, because it actually lets us understand that the internet is the people, the user that build the internet. It's not the telecommunication that provide the internet. It's the communities, the local user that build the internet.
We do internet networking despite them.
Exactly.
I want to be more direct about it.
But I'm sure there will be some questions, some comments. So please, if you have any questions, just raise your hand.
This is not a Japanese audience. Okay.
Bob, de certa forma, o que você falou, ele vai complementar bem o que a gente vai falar daqui a pouco aqui também na próxima mesa. Mas qual é a visão? Nós temos uma visão muito peculiar aqui do Brasil e a visão que a gente tem fora, né, do Brasil em relação a redes comunitárias, ela é ainda um pouco escassa essa informação que a gente tem. Qual é a visão que você tem de como é que esse movimento das pessoas que estão tomando para si a responsabilidade de criar suas próprias redes e se você tem alguma visão sobre o contexto, por exemplo, político e regulatório de como é que isso ocorre ao redor do mundo?
Okay, there are two ways we answer. Nicholas is going to talk about his efforts, which are very good. But one issue is people don't see it as applying to the rest of society. They think, okay, in this extreme cases, it's okay. And what I'm trying to say is that this is the model for everywhere. Now, when I did home networks, I spent basically no time whatsoever speaking to regulators because you can do it yourself. So if the village is connecting itself, it's possible for somebody to come in and say, you're not allowed to speak to each other. In Germany, you're not supposed to have open Wi-Fi. And you'll get a lot of these misunderstandings. There's a separate policy for copper and something. So, I can't say in each area how you push back on it, but I think what's important is in the world, you get examples you could point to. So, Nicholas' example is great, but people might not say it doesn't apply to me. And this is why, deregulation, take this off. I don't know what's happening. Yes. So in deregulation in the United States with AT&T being broken up, it didn't happen because the United States regulators were smart or anything. It happened because the economics changed. And also, actually, AT&T was clunky and got Congress really annoyed. But that set an example for the PT&Ts. So you've got a worldwide thing. So to the extent, you have the villages here, maybe you'll see that example. To the extent you have apartment houses, which I'm trying to do in the United States, and housing develops, you start to see examples and empower people. And the question is, to what? No, you take the university here. Why does the university lock down the visitor network? Why? What are they? Can you explain why? This is why I point out the metaphors, because they're worried somebody's going to eat up too much internet. It's like somebody's going to eat too much lunch at the buffet. They're just bad metaphors. So I think a lot of it is setting examples and starting to move. Now, where do regulators fit in? You need regulate. Actually, let me be more fair to regulators. If you take a look at the history, I'll give you the United States history. There's a good book, Railroaded, by Richard White, which is about railroads in the western United States. And they were never really financially viable. They scammed the King of England or anybody they get money from, and money went for good causes. Stanford University was paid for out of ill-gotten gains from railroads. But they recognized the problem, so they created the Interstate Commerce Commission. The railroads cooperated with creating the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate the railroads. They wanted to be regulated, because without regulation, every time you ran a track, it would undermine the others. You didn't have a viable marketplace. The Federal Communications Commission was modeled after the Interstate Commerce Commission because of the railroad model of telecommunications. The fact that telegraph wires ran along the railroad probably didn't hurt there. And we even went so far as to take colors, radio frequencies, and turn them into property because we thought you needed resident tuning forks or something. So all these ideas went in, and that gave us the FCC. So, but the same problem, the FCC was solving a marketplace that was not functional. If you had too many competitors, like too many electric wires offering the same wires, we kind of little this morning, it doesn't work. You want to share the infrastructure. That's why we created AT&T as the well-meaning quasi-government telephone company. Then the vestige came, things changed, broke up. But that was the intent, was to create a dysfunction, a problem in the marketplace. And in the absence of no better solution, it made sense to have the regulations. The problem is the internet has demonstrated an alternative model where it's in balance, it's functioning. We don't need the regulation. I'll give you a simple example. If you have the cable TV company owning the wires, and you go by Netflix, the more capacity they give you, the less value they deliver in terms of the content. So you get these inherent conflicts of interest. Now, as we start to split up, and this is happening in the U.S. despite Comcast is really two companies, which is the Wire Company and NBC Universal. I don't know the Brazilian equivalent, but you start to see all these examples as they split them up. So the market's going to do it. It's just the regulators, and probably I hate to say the telecommunications people haven't figured out what's really happening. So there's market forces happening. But once you have the market in balance, if you own your wires, you as a community want more capacity, you can get more capacity because scarcity is no longer creating value as it does traditionally.
Thank you, Bob, for reminding us that infrastructure is basic and that it's basic and simple, and actually we should focus on infrastructure rather than trying to focus on alternative ways not to use the infrastructure. So I think we have a couple of other questions. I think we can take 2 or 3, and then you can give a round of replies.
I'll talk as long as you want me to. I just don't want to take the world Nicholas' time.
Well, my question is related to, it's a little bit off topic considering your presentation, but I guess that I've been thinking a lot about it recently, and it is about the blockchain technology. How far do you think that we are from having a new paradigm in which all governments are using blockchain technology for daily routines and administrative?
Sorry, before getting into blockchain technology, maybe we have a couple of other questions. Maile, you had one, and I think you had also one, Daniel.
Okay, 2 quick questions. One of them is related to Marcelo's question with regards to the political and the social scenario that kind of enables this kind of movement to flourish. Because we were talking on the previous panel how some people could have access to the internet. It's not a matter of price, it's just a matter of perception of the value of the internet and how it will affect and change their lives. So if this value is not clear, and I'm not agreeing that it's not just a theory, but if it is indeed not clear, how could these people be aware enough in order not only to build the networks themselves, but also to have the conscious of this bargaining power that they would have with the other structures? And the second question is related to the example that you gave with the network of FGV. The reason why they force everybody to put their names and codes is if someone does anything illicit, they will be able to reach the particular person that did something illicit using their networks. That's the idea. And in the community networks, would it be possible in terms of, yeah, I know it's naive, but anyway, that's the mindset of a policymaker. So in terms, technically speaking, in terms of community network, would it be possible to single out a particular individual, and how could that be done? Because we are now forced, if we access through land houses in Brazil, we are forced to take the CPF, which is the identity of the individual, so we can single out the person. That is this mindset that you need to. Yeah.
Well, first let me answer the blockchain, because that's a simple one to answer. It's a technology for distributed trust and everything. I think it's not an internet thing. I want to say about blockchain from Bitcoin. So blockchain is a mechanism, and it's an interesting mechanism for transactions, but I think it's just one way we use connectivity. It's enabled by connectivity now, of course you can still be connected. The one problem I have with using blockchain, though, is it requires connectivity. If you want to make a transaction that's not connected, you got a problem. So it's an interesting technology, but I see it, and I've got a little into that, but I think it's a separate issue. So here's what, we could also apply the same thing to streetlights. Because what if you commit a crime using a streetlight? You have to register to be a user of the streetlight. This goes in with the sort of the medieval idea that you've got good bits, bad bits, intrinsic uses. So, if a society, basically, you have to justify each innovation or idea, Skype, or what I did with home networks, I violate the terms of service. So there's a mindset issue, and the U.S. was lucky. We escaped from Britain before we internalized this. Many other colonies have a regulate first mindset. So the idea that you're assuming everybody is evil first until proven good is a problem. And we have some problem in Germany where you're supposed to force copyright. So this is why I compared with your porch light in front of your house. you don't lock that down, but we still have this is a bad metaphor, that you're responsible for things people think while they're visiting you. I don't know of a good answer except when there's enough, like in the community networks, you do it below the radar. When in the home network, the telecom companies cooperated with me until they realized that the value, they were no longer getting the value of the transaction, and all they could do was what AT&T did, which is go bankrupt. So I don't know how you push it back, but I think right here is a good place to start, to have a discussion of why do you assume your students are criminals until proven otherwise, and what the price you pay by preventing innovation. And so it is a hard one. So the only thing I can do is say that in the world you'll see places that thrive because there's a good book by David Landis, I think, The Kleinfold Nation, I forgot the name of it exactly, which basically countries that allow chaos and survive it, that don't survive chaos, thrive. So I don't have a better answer than that, but I think you could start by really pushing back on why do you have to track down everything, and who decides what's illegal? If I do something that's illegal in the Ukraine, does Brazil really want to make its whole infrastructure based on that? Or vice versa, which is more likely.
Thanks, Bob, for your reply. Is there any other question? Yeah, I think we can take a last question, and then we can go directly to concrete example of how community networks are put in place with Nicholas and Federica.
Yeah, I just want to know your perspective on the kind of more restrictive U.S. state laws that are in place, and possibly also in places about creating community networks.
Okay, a good question, something I've actually... I'm actually not talking about those because the problem is a lot of those things you call community networks, like Chattanooga, Lafayette, all these, are not really community networks. They're mini telephone company networks. They're modeled after the phone companies, same policies, just not the same scale and expertise. So they're not community facilities. And that's the problem I have, is people look at those examples, and that's why I hate the term broadband, because they model it after the phone companies. And they become just like the phone companies with bad economics and everything. So I think the way around those laws is, first you set examples, but you basically don't build a network. Now, in Utah, in the United States, Utopia did try to build infrastructure, but it's still a wholesale retail model that ran afoul. So there you've got to basically have examples to point to, but I think we have to be careful that we don't confuse community broadband networks, which are just like phone companies, with real community networks, which is owned by the community as a common, well, they're owned by the community, but this is why I say free to use. You have to have a free-to-use ambient connectivity if you want to get the generative properties. Otherwise, you just have a locally owned cable company, which isn't that much different than the traditional telecom companies. And we have, this is why I also don't like the word high-speed internet. The value is not in the speed, the value is in the connectivity.
Thanks a lot, Bob, for these very enlightening thoughts. And so thanks a lot again.